We acknowledge that our work takes place on unceded and occupied territories of the 575 plus Native nations. We are inviting you to take a moment to reflect on whose land you are living and working on. And if you don't know, to research and reflect. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's film series and conversation. We are so excited about today because today is a very, very important conversation that has been prevalent, for 500 plus years, but also very much in the news today. And thank God it's only taken we've been in the entertainment industry and media for over 100 years. So, I'm excited about the fact that we're able to have this technology and these tools to tell our stories. Who tells the story matters, right? So my name is Joanelle Romero, and I'm your host today. And I have two guests that I'd like to introduce you to. Our first guest is Steve Newcomb, and Steve has had an extraordinary career in the work that he does, and with Doctrine of Discovery and Domination. And our second guest is Michelle Schenandoah. And I'm a relative of the Haudenosaunee Nation. I have a nephew over there somewhere. So I'd like to welcome Michelle Schenandoah. The theme today is only one water. Doctrine of Discovery. They wanted our resources, women, land, and water. And I titled it Only One Water because as life givers, we're all engulfed in our mother's womb, wrapped in the sacred water. And so it's just really clear to me that it starts there, the birth, right? Giving birth. And so that's what we're going to talk about, giving birth to a lot of different things. Some are good, some are not so good for us, as all human beings here, as we're living here together. I'm going to introduce Steve Newcomb. And Steve, for our viewers, well, first, hi, Steve.
Hello. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to go with the first question. And what for our viewers, because you're this has been your whole career, 50 plus years, I believe, on the Doctrine of Discovery and Domination. For our viewers, what does that mean? Because some people don't know. So we have to go back to elementary,
right.
Introduction.
Well, let me first of all say thank you very much for having me, and I view it more as a life path than a career. I mean, career might be a technical term for it, but it has been a life path of trying to figure out exactly what happened to our nations and peoples over the course of the centuries since colonization, since the invasion began. In addition to that, but before I really go into anything further, what I wanted to do is, if you don't mind, is set the context as I understand it. Because I think if we understand and acknowledge the original free and independent existence of our nations and peoples extending back to the beginning of time through our oral histories and traditions, and contrast that original free existence with our languages, cultures, spiritual traditions, our life ways, everything that we had, everything that our ancestors had over the tremendous period of time, and contrast that with the system of domination that was brought by ship across the ocean from Western Europe, or what was then called Christendom, and imposed on everyone and everything here, then we have the starting point for a very rich and powerful conversation, a way to respond to the arguments and ideas that those colonizers brought with them and that they have been working with ever since. So that begins a good way of acknowledging that we have this challenge where you have a fundamental and diametrically opposing conflict between a way of life that acknowledges, as you said, the life givers and that the sacred waters within the womb of the woman and all the sacred waters of the earth, and what that really means on a deeper level within our own languages, but also that the contrast of those things, that interconnection of all life with another system that seems like it's only bent on exploiting and dominating and destroying life at a very fundamental level. And in fact, all the way down to the very fabric, the very basis of the fabric of life itself. So there's a lot at stake as a result of that. And I think that your program here today and just what you're doing generally is very powerful, because it provides Indigenous folks, original nations folks, with the opportunity to tell our story, our perspective from our with our insights and understandings as we've been able to put them together through the course of our lives. Now, with regard to with that very long-winded introduction, with regard to what's called the doctrine of discovery, which I think is kind of a misnomer, because what it does is it focuses on the word discovery rather than the actual more important word, which is the word domination, and the claim of a right of domination that they brought with them. And that's where my focus is these days. Having said that, I want to also acknowledge my friend and mentor, Virgil Kilstraight, who passed to the spirit world in February of 2019. Without Virgil's guidance and insights and teachings and so forth, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. So I always want to acknowledge him, because he was such a powerful personality and such a powerful spiritual man. And he, you know, that's a whole nother program, probably, just talking about some of our elders and what they managed to achieve over the course of their lives. So we're standing on their shoulders, so to speak. But yeah, that claim of a right of domination, and that's expressed very well in the Vatican documents of the 15th century, all the way from, we could take it back to 1095 AD if we want to talk about the First Crusade, but taking it up to the 1400s, you have these various Vatican documents issued during the 15th century from about 1436 until into the next century, 1514, and all of the specifics of the language. But when you get right down to it, and I could go into more detail on that, but I'm going to defer to our other guest here, but Michelle, but that idea that they could give permission, supposedly backed by God, by their concept of God, to invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to take away all their possessions and property. Those are the horrific patterns that are still continuing today. And so that's what we have to deal with, because those concepts and the behaviors that go with them have been woven into so-called laws and policies ever since they got over here. And then, you know, with regard to other parts of the planet too. So I'll just leave it right there.
Well, thank you, Steve. That's a perfect introduction to this topic. You know, one of the things that's engulfed, I don't know if that's the correct word, in this conversation today is the boarding schools, right? And so that is a form of, you know, them trying to take control of the next generations of our of our peoples. And it's just, you know, I'm just going to address this. You know, there's two things before I ask Michelle a question, is that it's very interesting. My makeup, my bloodline being a Spanish Sephardic Jew and Native, right, Indigenous woman. And it's to live through this in my lifetime and go through these, I believe that I'm here with this purpose to bring these topics more to life in regards to this. My relative was the first ordained priest before this was the United States of America on the Spanish Sephardic side, right? So it's a very interesting dual thing that I go through, and the healing that needs to happen for the generations to come. And, you know, my film American Holocaust was, even though we didn't have the money to do the bigger picture that we wanted to do back 27 years ago, we did, in that film, we have brought up the topics that we're talking about today, still talking about today, of the boarding schools and the doctrine of domination and all of that. So, Michelle, as a young girl, you were inspired to become an attorney, which is like so powerful, by following in the footsteps of your great-grandmother's legacy, in which she brought one of the first land claim cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Tell us more about this and how your personal and legal journey has been directly impacted by the doctrine of discovery. I'm going to say the doctrine of domination.
Yeah. Well, also thank you, Yamago Janelle, for having me back on the show. Just really grateful to be here. And yeah, I could have never fathomed how much this doctrine would come to play a part of my life from a young girl and to being an adult. Here I am and working within our territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I'm a member of the Oneida Nation Wolf Clan. And yeah, as a young girl, our land claims, they were ripe. We were really in the middle of it. We had one of the first cases before the Supreme Court regarding land, because there was a time when we couldn't bring cases to the courts as Indigenous peoples. So when that door opened, a number of Oneidas and my great-grandmother, who was really sort of at the lead of that, got our case in there. The Supreme Court said, yes, New York State, you took millions of acres from the Oneidas, and now you need to settle it with them. So when I was a young girl, that process of trying to settle was happening, and my grandmother was one of our clan mothers, and she's now in Skyworld. And so speaking of, you know, being here on the work of our ancestors and those who've guided us, I just want to acknowledge my grandmother for all of the work that she did on our land claims. My mom, Diane Shenandoah, is one of our faith keepers. So I would go with them to these meetings, and for whatever reason, I don't know, our people were in sort of hot, heated debate about this issue or that issue around our land claims, but the attorneys would show up and suddenly it was like silence in the room. Everyone would listen. So I realized at that age, I'm like, wow, you know, what's going on here? I really want to be a part of this. And I could recognize that the attorneys were the ones sort of really doing, you know, a lot of this work within the courts, and had the opportunity to bring people together to listen as well. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. But the interesting turn of events happened in 2005 when I started out on my first year of law school. And that's when the Sherrill versus Oneida Nation case was decided. And that case was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, you know, so many people adore, right? But in the same, you know, same
Breath.
Whatever light, she, you know, is the one who cited the doctrine of discovery against the Oneidas and talked about the Haudenosaunee and saying that our fires of sovereignty had long grown cold, and it was a horrible case against our people and against all Indigenous peoples. And I didn't know what to think, this being my first year of law school, but what I understood at that point was that it closed the doors on all of our land claims as Haudenosaunee people within the court system. And that was pretty devastating. I still went through, finished law school, and then I went on to go get a second law degree in tax law, because I figured we always have a good tax issue that comes up. But I guess I didn't really realize all the implications of what it truly meant until, I got out a little bit more and I started doing work with a lot of our women within our communities and focused in on the prevention and awareness of sexual assault, domestic violence, issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and realizing the thread that ties all the way back through residential schools, ties all the way back through all of the policies, and then ties all the way back really to this, doctrine of discovery, this doctrine of destruction, if you will. And what one of our clan mothers likes to say, which is an illegitimate assumption of superiority over our people and over the lands, and all of the taking and destruction that has happened throughout those years. And so while I never continued to pursue the American legal system as a profession, I'm actually, quite grateful now that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually cited this in 2005. For a long time, I was pretty upset about it, but I came to realize, had she not written that in this case, it would be really hard now for our people to really point to that doctrine and say that it's alive and well. So she breathed life back into this very racist and genocidal doctrine that lives and breathes in American law and policy. It's the basis for all of land title throughout the United States, and most people don't realize that. So the law informs policy, policy informs education, and education informs how people behave. So really, under the law, within education, within mainstream society, Indigenous peoples have been invisibilized. We have not been seen, our issues have really not been heard or addressed, and within policy, we've just been a problem, right? You can literally look at policy and the Indian problem, right, has been addressed, at a federal level, at many state levels, and it's all been towards genocide. It's been towards the elimination and eradication of our peoples and culture. And when that didn't work, residential schools appeared, right? So if we couldn't disappear from the land, well, then the next step was to try to convert us to becoming something that we're not. And the devastation of all of that can be seen today in intergenerational trauma, and looking at all of the effects that have happened over the course of hundreds of years now. And so, that's my story, starting out, but even more recently, the doctrine of discovery, again, I addressed that recently. We'll talk about this in a minute, I'm sure, but, came up with my trip to the Vatican this last spring.
Michelle, you brought up the words, the two words that live not only in so many different professional realms, but definitely in the entertainment industry and in politics, and it's the Indian problem. Mm-hmm. When I've discovered, I've noticed that in meetings I'll be sitting in, and they will bring up and use that term. Let's talk about the Indian problem, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very condescending. It's just something that that is alive and well. So I'm glad that you brought that, because it is a term that they use against us. right? To not let us move forward or support our efforts. But today's a different day. Today's different with technology, and because of Black Lives Matter, and because of, why we wear red, and the murdered and Indigenous women, and, Standing Rock, and all of those things in the last, since 2016, right? We're in a different era right now, which is real exciting, because the doors are open. I believe they've always been open. We just have to knock them down. When the door shuts, that's our revolution, right? So Steve, Steve made an incredible film about the doctrine of domination.
Sheldon.
Well, Sheldon Wolfchild.
Sheldon.
Yes. Sheldon Wolfchild and you made this beautiful, thank you for the correction, made this beautiful film. And I call it beautiful because it is beautiful, because it needed to be made and told and expressed. And it's called The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code. And it was released in 2014. And we'll give you, at the end of the show, points where to watch it. But Steve, I want to ask you, what continuing influence do the Vatican papal bulls have on our lives today as original nations and peoples?
Well, what I had mentioned earlier about the claim of a right of domination is what continues today. So everything that Michelle was talking about are examples of how the claim of a right of domination is manifested. The illegitimate assumption of superiority, as expressed by one of the clan mothers there in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, is talking about the illegitimate claim of a right of domination, because that idea of superiority is simply that. And my idea now is to help people to understand that that's at the basis of all of it. The idea of reconciliation that's being promoted in so many places is really a non-starter, because you didn't have a positive relationship to begin with that has to be put back together to where the people reconcile. You have a claim of a right of domination exercised genocidally against our nations and peoples to strip us of everything, including our children, our languages, anything to do with our existence as distinct and free and independent nations and peoples, and attempting to carry on as if nothing has happened, and as if we're just all Americans now, which they're going to be celebrating that idea through the celebration of the Indian Citizenship Act in 2024. That's going to be interesting to see. And that we're just all supposed to be Americans. But that was the part of the genocidal program, which of course genocide is defined by Raphael Lemkin as the effort or the intention to destroy in whole or in part specific nations and peoples, distinct nations and peoples. So that's what's been going on. And when we look at those Vatican documents in the Latin and the English and go back and forth between those two languages, then these patterns emerge. And so that would be an entire show that we could dedicate to the etymology of domination. And the sentence, as just one example, the sentence in the May 3rd Papal Bull of 1493 that says, we trust in, is English, obviously, translated from the Latin, but it says, we trust in him, from capital H on him, so that's referring to their deity, from whom empires and dominations and all good things proceed. So if the empires and dominations are coming out of him, who is Jesus Christ or God, does that mean it's a God of domination? Was the question that I posed to the Vatican ambassador at the United Nations back in around 2012, and he never missed a beat. He said, well, everything comes from God, the birds and the trees, and what was your name again? So this they weren't expecting us to even survive, let alone get this deep into their language and their documents and all that. But it's one thing to go into those old language patterns. It's another thing to get people to comprehend at a deep enough level and have an understanding of the systemic way in which this manifests. This claim of a right of domination continues to manifest today. And if we take our eyes off of that, even for a moment, then it just immediately goes out of focus and we're on to some other topic. And even though that's the operating system behind the scenes.
Wow. Yeah. It's my mind is just, woo. Yeah, it's pretty lethal. That I think is the appropriate word. It's pretty lethal. So Michelle, well, I want to let the viewing audience know that, this, I'm going to go off topic for a moment. I'm going to let the viewing audience know that this monthly film series, right? It's a series that we launched 3 years ago, right before the pandemic. It was March 5th and March 7th was when the doors closed, right? So, but it's the first time in the entertainment industry where there's in person, right? Where we have Native films being screened on the silver screen theaters, and once a month with a conversation series. And so we've just now are doing it online. So this month we have a whole array of films that you can tune into at rednationtv.com. I just wanted to let everybody know that these films are available, and some of those films Michelle directed. There's three shorts being streamed as well. Okay, so getting back to this conversation, both of you met the Pope. I want to talk about that. Both of you met the Pope, and different times, different years. And my next question is to Michelle. You traveled to the Vatican with the Assembly of First Nations delegations to meet with the Pope in a private audience. I wonder what that was like. As I understand, these meetings led to his apology to Indigenous peoples in Canada regarding the Catholic Church's responsibility in the loss of children's lives and the abuses that took place. From what I understand, you left an empty cradle board overnight with the Pope. What was your role in this delegation? And tell us about the significance of bringing this cradle board to the Pope.
Yeah. Well, I got a message about 10 days before the delegation left. I got a text message that said, I apologize, there's some loud bikes outside. I don't have much control over that. I hope you didn't hear it. But I got a message about 10 days before leaving. I had no idea that the delegation was leaving at the end of March. I knew that there was one going, but I got a text message from our clan mother, Mama Bear, the Bear clan mother who I've been referring to. And she sends me a message that says, would you like to go to Rome next week to meet with the Pope? And I was like, what? I thought it was really like a little bit of a joke because I wasn't aware of what was going on. And, who gets a text message like that, to meet the Pope next week? But anyways, it was real. And so the invitation actually had been sent to her to come as a spiritual advisor to the delegation. They had a male spiritual advisor and they wanted to have a female spiritual advisor to join the delegation. She wasn't able to go. So she asked myself and my sister, Gudgy Junie Fox, who you're familiar with, who's also a filmmaker. The two of us traveled over there. It was determined that I would speak and be the one to go into this private audience, and she would come and help in supporting this role for the delegation. And I did. I brought an empty cradle board. I gave a speech. I worked with our other spiritual advisor, Elder Fred Kelly, and we determined that he would do an opening and I would do a closing for our time with the Pope. We would be meeting with him twice throughout the week. There were 3 delegations that met with him. There was a Métis delegation. They went in their own private audience. There was an Inuit delegation and then a First Nations delegation. And at the very end, everybody would come together and then hear, the Pope's apology at the very end. So I was in the 3rd delegation that met with him. And I brought this cradle board. I asked for the words to come through me, and they did. My speech can be found up on the website of Rematriation.com. So that is the nonprofit that I run, but you can find my speech on there that I delivered to him. And it really addressed the doctrine of discovery through and through, right from the very beginning to the very end. And I wore the cradle board in with me, and I left it with the Pope overnight. And I basically had said to him that the way that you treat this cradle board will come to be the way you treat our people in the future. And I left it with him to reflect upon all the children who never came home and all of the impacts that it's had on our families, on our nations, and to really consider what those relations will be like with our peoples going forward, and to recognize just the depth of devastation. And so I did, I left it with him. I think there may have, I don't know if he seemed to, he seemed really delighted when I brought the cradle board up to him. And I wanted to make it very clear, this is not a gift. This is here just as a point of reflection. And so the cradle board the next day in the general audience, I had to ask where it was. It wasn't, out in the public to be seen. It was not part of his apology and his time with everybody. And he actually had the Canadian Catholic bishops who were on this trip. They're the ones who returned it to me. And so as they were, handing this back to me, I made it really very clear in that moment that, to understand what the purpose was, and that our people are really seeking the revocation of the papal bulls that make up this doctrine of discovery. And they said that they would speak about this when they return to Canada. I've inquired about that. I'm still waiting for a response. And the Pope will be coming to Canada in July. So I know that they are busy with preparing for his arrival and working with the First Nations representatives to oversee that trip happen. But I'm still waiting to hear a response for them to meet with our people, with our Haudenosaunee Confederacy and other Indigenous leaders who've been working for generations on the request for this revocation and to oversee that happen. So, the timing of it, is I think this is just a time of truth telling that's emerging in the world. And so, we're looking at Canada, most people will say, oh my gosh, this just all happened in Canada. Well, it didn't. It happened here too. And Secretary Deb Haaland just released a report on an investigation that she called for on residential schools. And there's, the report said that there's 408 schools in the United States that spanned across 37 different states, with 58 of those schools having burial sites. And they expect more schools to have burial sites. And that's considerably more schools in the United States than there were in Canada. And I think that this country really has to come to terms and come to grips with this history, even just to become aware of it, first of all, as a starting point, but to recognize that there's a horrible history here in this country that needs to be addressed. And so with the Pope coming here, let's see what happens, if that changes anything. For a lot of Indigenous peoples, their response was, an apology is not enough. There really needs to be responsibility, accountability, and it needs to be more than that. And I think, it would be really wise for the church to consider, in coming here, to recognize this is not their land, right? Even though that there has been this perspective of domination and superiority, to understand that this is Indigenous land, and that the original peoples of these territories have protocols and processes, and to check in with those nations and make sure that those are followed, right? And before putting a blessing down on anything, ask, right? Is this what the Indigenous peoples here want? And I think that there needs to just be more understanding that we have our own sovereignty. We have our own right to be who we are, and we don't need anybody to tell us who we are, what to believe, and go from there, right? I mean, we're at this point in history where we can't recreate this ideal sense where it is only Indigenous lands. We're all here together now. So, going back to your theme of one water, I think we're all really going to have to truly figure out together, how do we go forward?
Yeah.
But these histories do have to be reconciled in some way.
Yeah. I absolutely. And, it is going to be interesting, because I would be very blown away, actually. I would be flabbergasted if he actually said he was on native land, and that the church has responsibility to move forward in a healing, inclusive recognition. Just those two things, I would be flabbergasted. I was in 2004 when the Smithsonian recognized our brothers and sisters in Mexico as Native people. That was 2004. That was a big deal. I danced all day long. That was so exciting, right? So we'll see. I mean, there's hope, right? Today's about the truth telling. So hopefully that'll happen. Steve, you also met with the Pope. Was it 2012?
It was 2016.
2016, yeah. And you also spoke at the United Nations. Am I correct on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, our history of this, working with this issue goes back to 1992, when we founded the Indigenous Law Institute. My friend Virgil Kilstrut and I did, and we began a campaign at that time to call upon the Pope, who was then John Paul II, to formally revoke the Inter Cetera Papal Bull of May 4th, 1493, and to deal with all these issues that we're discussing here today. And so everything that's happened since then has been pretty amazing to watch, the way that starting point has evolved. And then when we went to Seville, Spain, my friend Dr. Deborah Harry, the Paiute Nation, and Sharon Ben from the Cree Nation, and I went to Madrid, and then we went from there. Sharon drove us all the way to Seville, or to Sevilla, and we were able to go to the archives of the Indies and see two of the original Vatican papal bulls. And it happened to be the exact day, the May 3rd or May 4th, I forget which, that the papal bull had been issued. So that was a weird coincidence. And then 3 years later, in May, once again, on either May 3rd or May 4th, one was May 3rd and the other one was May 4th. Coincidentally, we met with the Pope and with the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And during that time, we spent, I did briefly speak to the Pope. That was more of in a sense, a photo opportunity, perhaps, I'm not sure. But I gave him a copy of my book, Pagans in the Promised Land, Decoding the Doctrine of Christian Discovery, and a document that we had prepared for him. And I said that we were calling on him to formally revoke the Intercitera Papal Bull of May 4th, 1493, to lift the darkness that the Vatican had placed on our peoples. And he said he would read the book. Then we went on from there to the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and a meeting that lasted more than 2 hours with Archbishop Silvano Tomasi. And I was able to tell him, I said, with respect, I believe there's much of your own history you don't know. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever actually read the papal bulls? And he said, no, I must confess. And I said, well, that's all right, but I've been reading these documents since 1989 in Latin and English, so I think I know a little something about them. Permit me to elaborate. And then I went into great detail about the patterns of domination. And we later received a letter from him, about a 2.5 pages letter. And I think initially it seemed significant, but then on closer examination, I think only about 28 words out of 2.5 pages of words actually pertained in any way, shape, or form to what I had addressed to him. And those 28 words were mainly the titles of those documents and just minor references to them. And so they've been sidestepping this issue. They're still not taking it seriously. They're trying to use apologies and other kinds of superficial gestures to avoid dealing with the true nature of the assertion of a claim of a right of domination over our nations and peoples, which was picked up by the US Supreme Court and other Supreme Courts of other countries. And that's the basis of the domination system that's still being used against our nations and peoples to this day. So the truth telling that we're talking about really has to be a matter of telling the truth about domination and that claim that they are somehow superior over us because in our nations and peoples, because they have the ability to use that word Christian as some kind of a cover word as a disguise for what they're really doing. So yeah, it's a very, very challenging matter of how do we address these things and get deep into the details, deep into the substance, and do it in a good manner, in a spiritual way, the spiritually grounded, and in moving toward a transformative effort, moving ahead in a transformative manner that will truly be beneficial to all living things.
Well, Steve, you brought up something, and I'm going to try to articulate it as best I can. And that is what I'm getting is okay, so Christianity, right? Because you brought up something that they're using that as a blanket to do all of this, domination. But a lot of our people are Christians and Catholics and so forth, and they've adjusted to not doing, practicing their traditional ways, right? And some are both traditional practices and Christianity, but all of that, all of that, believing in a higher power, they're using that to do all of this domination stuff, taking our land, women, resources, creative energy, all of that. And I know I'm not articulating this so well, but can you help me here, Steve? It's like those are two different issues. Those are two different things altogether, right?
Well, that's part of the challenge, is figuring out how to, my apologies, I've got this on my cell phone and it just fell over. But the challenge is to go into the language. See, we're using the colonizers' language in an effort to make sense of our lives. And that's challenging in itself. So we have to get a deep understanding of this language that we're using. And it's not that easy. It's not as simple as just approaching it for a short period of time and thinking we're going to figure it out. It's an ongoing conversation that we have to have in order to sort it all out and to make sense of our own identities, our own existence, and all the things that we're dealing with, right? And it takes tremendous amounts of time to do that. It takes patience with one another. It takes compassion. It takes principles such as the 7 laws of the Ochecheshikoi, the Uope, and or other nations. I mean, each of our nations, we have our own comparable types of principles or concepts, the correct way to live, the great law of peace, those kinds of ideas, right? So, but this idea that people they've attached themselves to something, or they become devoted to a particular religious tradition, and they view that religious tradition in a positive light. What I'm saying is that there's a dark side to the institution that people are unaware of. And the unfortunate thing is, if you use the actual word Christian that they use in those documents, you won't find the word European in any of those Vatican documents, because that word wasn't used back then in that way, okay? But you will find is Christians, and the distinction between Christians, heathens, infidels, pagans, all that kind of terminology. That's a quote unquote religious orientation, okay? But none of that's really important. The true importance is this theme of domination. Once you really truly understand that, then you can realize, oh my gosh, all of this, the entire world order is premised upon a claim of a right of domination. And that's why so much of the economics of the planet, the political systems of the planet, the social systems of the planet, and so forth, have been organized around that claim of a right of domination. So civilization, state, sovereignty, ascendancy, dominion, property, and empire, those are 7 terms of domination, but they're using other vocabulary so nobody will recognize. I mean, I'm not saying that they intentionally did it that way. I'm saying that this is a feature of the language that once you understand it, then you realize, oh my goodness, because people are using those synonyms for domination, and they don't even know that's what those are. They think they're talking about 7 different things, when in fact they're talking about the same thing in 7 different ways. And with the right amount of time, we could go into all the detail. So this is a confusion, because when we use the word Christian, then people that are oriented toward Christianity in a positive way, they think we're attacking Christianity. That's not what we're doing. And what we're doing is trying to shed light on these deeper patterns, and we see it right in the documentary movie. If you, as a Christian, anyone as a Christian, is not in favor of domination, if you're against domination, then join us in opposing domination, to say end the domination. And how can, this idea of murdered and missing Indigenous women and all the things that were done to the children in those so-called boarding schools, because those were brainwashing centers, indoctrination centers, inculcation centers, and all that. Those are all indicators of domination. The destruction of our ecological systems, the claim of states, which are systems of domination. The whole thing comes down to that. But it's really difficult to explain that unless the people have the patience and the time to really go through it meticulously to understand why we're saying what we're saying. Plenary power of Congress, ultimate dominion, and the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling, the idea that they can come over here and just assert themselves by doing ceremonies of possession, which are ceremonies of domination. And what does John Marshall say? He says the character and religion of its inhabitants, meaning the continent's inhabitants, afforded an apology, meaning a justification for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. Okay, what does ascendancy mean? You go into the dictionary, it means controlling influence, governing power, domination. It's one of the few words in the English language that has the word domination actually in the definition itself. So then you translate his sentence, the character and religion of its inhabitants afforded an apology for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim a right of domination. That's the translation of what his words are actually saying. And that's at the highest level of the US Supreme Court. So next year, next March is the 200-year mark for the Johnson versus McIntosh ruling. And it's going to be a very important time for us to use that as an opportunity to draw attention to these kinds of patterns.
So Steve, what just came up is, for me listening, is that, is there a course, like maybe it needs to be developed, like just a course, a 30-day course or a full year course to have these to learn about this, right? Because listening to you, listening to Michelle, like, you know, it's you know, and everyone else that's out there doing this work on the ground, doing this work, like, you know, these monthly film series and so forth, and giving just a little bit, you know, of a taste of what is really going on underneath. So is there a course, like a study course? Has anything been developed like that? Like where, but with what we're talking about today, not a whitewashed thing or a, you know, cotton candy thing, but a really, really in-depth course study. Has there been anything like that?
Well, my daughter Shauna has been, Shauna Blue Star Newcomb has been developing something she calls the Reverence Code course, and so she's going into a lot of that kind of information. I need to work on developing something along those lines with her or separate from what she's doing, to where we could get into these deeper conversations and take people through an ongoing process and be able to get people to that deeper insight and understanding. But yeah, we've been doing a lot of Zoom calls with people with the documentary movie. We show the movie, which was directed by Sheldon Wolfchild, a Dakota man from Lower Sioux in Minnesota, and also edited by Bill Weiss. And so we show that movie and we have conversations, but we need to have something more, more detailed in terms of the process. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know, even with my film American Holocaust, when it's all over, I'll still be Indian. It's still, you know, that was 27 years ago, right? So there, you know, I'm really excited about this because we'll talk after, but I have an idea that I want to share with you on that.
I think, Janelle, that's one of the really tough parts is within the educational system, this has not been present.
No.
You know, there's been, you know, wonderful academics, educators, our own leaders, you know, like Steve Newcomb and so many that have gone down this path to, you know, to find the information, to expose it, but it's not generally available. I mean, even for myself, I've had to create my own career path within, you know, or my own educational path to find this information and to bring it into my own realm of understanding because it's not available for people. It's, you know, you really have to look for it. You have to want to find it.
You have to want to know about it. You have to want to investigate it. You have to want to, you know, learn about it. You have to want to talk about it. You have to want to do something about it. So, you know, a few years back, we created the Native Studies Center, and we were partners with USC, and then some Indian problems came up. So we're addressing that issue. But I just want to say this, I'm real excited. I want to speak with both of you after the show about this. This is what I love about these conversations, because beautiful things, come about, ideas come about, collaborations come about, and they're so needed within not only Indian country and future generations, but for everyone in the world to understand really what has gone on here, this doctrine of domination. So we're like almost out of time, and it's been almost a full hour, and I'm going to I'm going to ask both of you one more question here. I have so many questions. I just got so many ideas with both of you. We always get this question. Well, I do anyway. I don't know if you do, Steve, or if you do, Michelle. When I bring up things from the past to either educators or unions or the film industry, the entertainment industry, or so forth, that let's address the past so we can move on. And they always say, no, let's not talk about the past. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. Let's just move forward. What's your take on that, Michelle?
I think it has so much to do with this entire conversation we're having right now. And I mean, when we're talking about domination, a big part of it has to do with the terra nullius, right? Which was that there's open and empty lands. And just from that perspective alone, right, that is contained within this doctrine of discovery, within these papal bulls, right? And it creates this picture, this image, or this idea that the lands are just open, that there's nobody there, right? And so when people even think about, the early days of colonists and the colonizers and the founding fathers, right? When they're here, they just see these white folks on the land and that there's just big open spaces. And anytime the idea of Indians, native people come up, then it's a spaghetti Western that might pop to mind, which is natives, out on the plains, shooting bows and arrows at cowboys. And it's problematic because right within the fabric of how this country came to be, based on this doctrine of discovery, this whole idea of doctrine of destruction, is this invisibilization of us as a people, the invisibilization of us as a culture. And everything has really been set up systematically to erase that identity. And I think that that's really important for people to understand, because once you start to peel back that lens, take off those glasses and really look at what's there, all of the policies that have been set forth really clearly show this path that this country has been on, which has been to erase us completely, to eradicate us from the land. And so the easiest way to deal with us is to invisibilize us. So the mainstream doesn't see us. They don't think about the impacts that all of these policies, all of this behavior has had on our people, had on our lands, had on Mother Earth, right? So at the end of the day, we really, really need to all consider that, right? And so, coming back to it, I just wanted to be able to share a little story, which was when I did go off to law school, my mother would remind me, she would say, Michelle, remember that, if you decide to become an attorney and you become sworn in, she says that you are agreeing to uphold the laws of the United States. And how is it that you can fight for our people by upholding the very laws that are designed to eliminate us? And to remember that as Indigenous peoples, we have our own laws, we have our own ways. And so I think that that's an important thing to remember as we move forward, is understanding that we are people of our own sovereign nations. And in the spaces where we ourselves became colonized, because of the realities of this forced colonization upon us through residential schools and all of the different factors throughout history, putting us onto reservations, relocation, keeping us from resources, those have had just detrimental effects on us over time. And I think one of the things we have to be really mindful of, whatever we believe in today, whether we're Christians, whether we're traditional peoples, is to understand that how we've arrived to where we're at was a survival of our ancestors, right? And the fact that we're still here. Stephen said it best that, we weren't supposed to even be reading these words within these doctrines, right? That there wasn't this expectation that we would be around to read them, but we are here. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that, and for this country to come to acknowledge it. And as Indigenous peoples, for us to embrace ourselves and to embrace each other, and to recognize that all of these horrors that brought us to where we're at today, we can't point fingers, or we can't, at each other, and say, well, you're this or you're that, you're Christian, you're not, but to understand that we were really forced to survive. And a lot of choices had to be made. And in many cases, we didn't even have a choice, right? So we have to embrace each other if we're going to heal and move forward, but also to look at those who are here from the settling countries to understand that they too have trauma, right? Because being someone who of a culture and a community that has created such offenses against other people and committed genocide against other people, that they carry that trauma as well. So the healing really is needed among all people.
Well, I would like to say, and I'm going to go back to Steve, Michelle, is I would like to acknowledge your grandma. What is her name?
Macy Shenandoah. Well, there was Macy Shenandoah, right, who was the clan mother, and then my great grandmother, who is Mary Cornelius Winder, and she's the one who worked on getting our case in the Supreme Court. I
just want to say her name out loud, so everyone will know her.
Thank you very much.
And I want to acknowledge my auntie Mary, who went to Haskell boarding school back in the day. Okay, so Steve, what is this thing about, the question that I posed about, we can't talk about our past, let's just move forward.
Well, no one has the ability to remove themselves from their own past, because the past is in our present. In this present moment, we are the product of all of our past experiences. So I think that we need to create a term in English, past present, which becomes the basis for what we do moving toward whatever kind of future we're going to build for our future generations. And it occurred to me as Michelle was speaking that what I had said to Archbishop Silvano Tomasi applies to the United States or to Canada or any other countries where these issues are prevalent. That to say there is much of their own history they don't know, because they don't know it from our perspective.
Right.
So there's a difference between the view from the shore looking out at those ships coming toward our ancestors and the view from the ship coming toward our ancestors. The educational system of the dominating society would have us adopt that from the ship viewpoint, and have us only know how to think about these things from that colonizer's perspective. Those of us that were fortunate enough, blessed enough to spend time with traditional elders, that helped us to have that view from the shore rather than the view from the ship. And it's with that kind of a thought process that we're making the effort to think about these things in English. And so even with regard to terra nullius, N-U-L-L-I-U-S, which means vacant land, there's another form of that or version of that, which is terra nullus, N-U-L-L-U-S, which means null and void or nullified, which is the invisibilization that Michelle is talking about. It's to render the people null and void, even though they're there physically, but to blank them out of the mind, to disacknowledge them so that they don't exist at all, maybe just physically destroy them. But if they do exist, then they're going to be ignored so that they don't interfere the agenda of the United States, that kind of thing. So English is a funny language. More than 60% of this English language is derived from Latin, the language of the Roman Empire, a language of domination. And so, but getting into these meticulous details is very, very key. And one other thing about Terra Nullius, it also was defined as the land of a heathen, pagan, infidel, or unbaptized person. So wherever these non-baptized people lived, they were considered null and void to the Christian world. And even though the proselytizing and all that, the mission system and so forth, was the evangelization is a key part of it. So you might think, well, that means they want to preserve them so they can save their souls. But, you know, even Junipero Serra here in California, when he founded the mission system that you see evidence of in these old mission buildings and stuff, there was one statement he made where he was celebrating the harvest, the celebration of two harvests. One, the harvest of wheat, and the other, the harvest of the souls of children who had died in the missions. So the fact, you know, I mean, there's a real dark side to deep dark side to all of this. And lastly, I'll say this with regard to the dark side. I was just in Denver at the Iliff School of Theology, and one of 5 Lenape people there who we convened to address the issue of a book called The History of Christianity. It's a book in Latin, only in Latin. The title translates to The History of Christianity. And the cover of that book was made from the skin of one of our ancestors that had been murdered. They made leather from his skin and used that as the cover to that book. And that was on display at the Iliff School of Theology from 1893, the 400th year since the Vatican Papal Bulls of 1493, until 1924, when Wes Martell of the Wind River Reservation, as a young AIMster and, you know, AIM activist and young student, he went up to Wind River, took that cover to his people, and the Sundance people dealt with it in the correct way that needs to be dealt with. At that time, we didn't know it was a Lenape person, but George Tinker, a theologian at Iliff School of Theology, who just recently retired, he did the research that found, you know, that determined that was a Lenape man who was dealt with in that horrific manner. So these are the kinds of things that we have to come to terms with. And so just, you know, these people are in denial, saying don't deal with the past. I mean, then forget about the Constitution. Well, they kind of are doing that anyway, aren't they, to an extent. But just forget about anything to do with the past. Then that's unrealistic. You know, we have to acknowledge that we are the product of our past, and we have to address all of these issues and figure out how to beneficially come together in a manner of healing and positive communication, so we can actually work these things out and build a beneficial future for our future generations.
Perfectly said. And we need to address the past to know how to move forward. You know, we need to know the history to move forward. So we went over an hour, so I just want to say I want to thank both of you for joining us today, and our viewing audience. You know, we have till the end of May to see all of these gorgeous films that are streaming on Red Nation Television Network. It's rednationtv.com. We're screening Sashin, Breaking the Silence, Missing You, Joanne Shenandoah's music video, Without a Whisper, and then Michelle Shenandoah's 3 films, Joe Buffalo, and some others. And most all of them have won at our Red Nation International Film Festival. So it's our doc short series, and you can watch it, all of them, streaming now on rednationtv.com. Again, I want to thank you, Steve Newcomb, and I want to thank you, Michelle Schenandoah, for joining us. Who Tells the Story Matters. And I'd also like to, and I'd also like to let all the viewers know that our American Holocaust series is streaming on Red Nation Television Network. It's a continuation of my film from 27 years ago. So there's a lot of beautiful hour sessions there, actually 2-hour sessions there with some of our spiritual leaders. Our Steve Newcomb is on one of them, Joanne Shenandoah, Phil Whiteman Jr. I mean, I could go on and on. So that's a continuous series, and it's also a podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll be back next month with another monthly film series conversation. And I'd like to also acknowledge Grandpa Wallace, who used to always tell me English is the worst language ever created. Just saying. That's what he used to say, because it's so confusing. With that said, I want to acknowledge one of our Blackfeet sisters who are in Montana, a young teenager, young woman who coined the hashtag not today colonized. I always say that. I have a hard problem. See, the English language is not so good. Not today colonized.
Colonizer.
Colonizer. There we go. Not today colonizer. I'll get it out of my
Enunciate slowly, you'll get it.
Yeah, I
Not
know.
today.
I have to,
Yeah, there you go.
anyway, thank you all, and see you next time.
Thank you, Joanelle. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
You.
Love you both.
Nice meeting you, Michelle. Thank you.